Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today we have Paul Claxton. He's an awarded business leader, global entrepreneur, and previous active duty, highly decorated U.S. Marine with 11 years on active duty and has completed 4 total tours in Iraq. He has developed opportunities and worked with clients across the globe in the Middle East, Mexico, Europe, USA, China, and Africa. And this has led to him producing well over 100 million of legitimate opportunities over the course of his career as an entrepreneur. He is focusing on using his 20 years of extensive operational leadership experience in building and sustaining all operational areas of a business. Recently, he has started and led 2 different bootstrapped companies, as has taken them from zero revenue from conception to over $200,000 in annual revenue in less than 3 months. He is currently mentoring veterans at veterati.com and has previously worked at a boutique headhunting firms, Fortune 500 staffing companies, marketing agencies, military command centers, bootstrap startups, high-growth startups, and project management firms. He's on a mission to make a statement on the world by using technology and best business practices and leadership to improve people's lives and advance society forward for the greater good. Awesome. So Paul, thank you so much for being on today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Paul, I want to dive first in regards to your experience in the leadership in the Marine Corps and how you're able to translate some of those insights that you've learned in operations, leadership, and how you're, translating that into entrepreneurship and business today. So I'd love to dive into that first.
My transition from the Marine Corps to the private sector was a very interesting one. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 18 years old, so the military was kind of what I always knew. But coming out of the Marine Corps with such a diverse, cultured experience of 10 years on active duty, it really kind of set me up for success in the business world, not just as a corporate executive, but also as a thriving entrepreneur. And moving from the Marine Corps into the business world, not having really any business experience, coming into the private sector, not even knowing very basic terms like non-disclosure agreements, not even knowing what that means. It was really a process of getting broken back down to the primer, essentially, and kind of self-educating myself. But also through the terms of taking more kind of structured or formal learning type opportunities, but also being willing and humble enough and having an appetite to be able to have those unstructured learning engagements and experiences. So in the process of getting broken back down in that primer analogy that I kind of use, so to speak, was it was a humbling one. It was one of many epiphanies, but that is something that essentially the Marine Corps has instills in all of its members of how do you work through chaos? How do you work through times when everything just seems to be going wrong, right? How do you work through that? How do you be resourceful? And it was those practices, that way of thinking, that ultimately has led me to where I'm at now and taken me through the ups and downs, but allowed me to bounce back from setbacks and failures, and but also to enjoy the successes, but at the same time to not let that go to my head. So those are definitely experiences that I've taken from the Marine Corps, and that I've kind of I've kind of figured out a way to replicate and mold and reteach myself time and time again into my professional career. So that's been a long process, and it's really ongoing. It's a lifetime event.
No, I completely agree. And I love the fact that you were able to highlight, I think, more like higher strategic thinking in regards to one, being humble, two, rebuilding the knowledge base, but also being able to have the mindset to work through chaos and understand that. And I really highly respect that. And I had, a former veteran, Rory Miller, on the show in the past as well. And just we discussed similar topics in regards to doing things that are difficult because, it's this is where I'm at right now. The outcome is on the other side. The through path is difficult, but the mindset and able to do that and leading teams. When you mentioned obviously the successes and the failures, and you were able to dissect that to personal teachings, are you open to share some of those insights for our listeners as well? Like, what are some of the insights or tips that you can recommend for leaders right now, especially when we're going through kind of an ambiguous time with transition?
It's really kind of boils down to really one thing, and it's a process of ownership and being willing to pay the price, right? Essentially, we have to earn our life every day. We're not, tomorrow is not promised to us. So we need to be able to kind of, earn our life. And so what do I mean by that is that, no situation, is essentially the way we want it to be. It's never really quite like that. And so, we have to take, what I've learned and, what the Marine Corps taught me is taking responsibility for all things in your life, that whether they go the way that you want or whether it's somebody else's doing, ultimately it's your life, and you kind of have to take control in terms of how do you either bounce back from that or move forward in some kind of way, or basically reconstruct your way of thinking or your approach to doing things so that those things don't continue to happen again. And so that you don't continue to experience setbacks, failures, and that you're ultimately able to just kind of slowly move the needle forward towards your personal goals, your business goals, and your endeavors. I feel that, and based on what I've seen, I mentor young veterans, people that are leaving the military. I mentor other business people, and one thing that I've seen that has been a constant is that most of us just aren't willing to pay the ultimate price. And so what happens is we go through our lives kind of not taking responsibility, not willing to pay that ultimate price, so to speak, because everything has an ultimate price. And then what happens is we live our lives, and we do end up paying the ultimate price because we don't live the lives that we could have, that we were capable of living, right? And then we realize that before it's too late, ultimately. So ultimately, every day what you want to do is you want to pay the ultimate price. If I'm going out and I'm looking for a new client, or if I want to get in shape, if I want to lose weight, well, then I got to pay the ultimate price to do that. That doesn't mean going in, with the analogy, the example of losing weight, that doesn't mean necessarily going and getting a gym membership, but that means sacrificing your diet, right? Getting up every day and working, no matter what happens, you have to reach your goal. And so, everything that you do, every choice that you make should be centered around that goal, which is essentially what I would call the ultimate price. So in terms of mind, body, and spirit, and just driving yourself in terms of mind, body, and spirit, totally centered in on that goal.
There's a huge balancing act there as well. And I want to break down what you just mentioned, because it sounds like, paying an ultimate price for a specific outcome, right? So some outcomes require different types of levels of ownership. And I think you hit it on the head when you talked about some people aren't willing to actually take full ownership of whatever that outcome is. And even I've seen that in companies that I'm behind the scenes in, or with other business owners, in seeing lack of responsibility as opposed to a complete ownership mentality. And I think you're going a little bit more beyond that too, is like saying, like, if you really want this goal, then you should do whatever you possibly can in your control to reach that goal. And I think that even myself personally, where we fall short in regards to when we're able to analyze and see, okay, this is what we want to do, we're falling short. What are some of the ways that you've helped business owners or yourself personally bridge those gaps in order to, quote unquote, pay the ultimate price to achieve that goal?
Well, one of the things that we have to do, if we're working to achieve a goal, there are just a few kind of main ingredients that we need to, that we essentially need to adopt as business owners, as people in general, right? And again, I'm going to go back to the mind, body, spirit thing, but I also want to paint a picture of, I think we're all familiar with the Cartesian coordinate system, right? So you have the X and Y axis, and at point zero, or your point of origin, that's kind of where we all start in life, right? Some of us are born into the positive side of that XY axis in quadrant 2, which would be a top left quadrant. I would consider that quadrant essentially maybe you're born into wealth, or maybe your father or your dad or your mom or something like that. Maybe you've basically got the perfect kind of utopian family, right? You've got sisters, brothers, you've got friends, you get straight A's in school, you have just a perfect life. It couldn't be any better, right? But many of us are not born into that quadrant. Many of us are born into the bottom left quadrant, which is quadrant 3, right? Which is maybe you're born in a single family household, or maybe you have a disability of some sort. We all have things that we have to deal with. But no matter what environment that you're born to, we all start at zero. So I call this is a concept that I came up with called perpetual velocity. And so how do you keep your life going forward and on the up and up, forward and up, right? So quadrant 1. But many of us are going forward, but we're going down, which is not where you want to go, quadrant 4. You don't want to be in that bottom right quadrant. So how do you keep your life going forward and up? Because no matter what, we're going to go forward. Time moves on. That is one thing that we cannot stop is time. But hopefully we want to be on the upward momentum trajectory, right? So part of that goes back to answer your question, part of that goes back to looking inside oneself and having these kind of micro epiphanies, so to speak, these revelations, right? And just realizing that, like time, we're constantly evolving as personalities, as humans. Every experience that we have in life consistently changes us. So we kind of need to be in a state of what I would call, constant self-reflection, or a constant state of almost in a constant state of surrealness, so to speak, with ourselves, and just kind of being very in touch with ourselves. And that really starts with, the spirit, right? And tapping into your spirit, but then really consciously thinking about, how do you think? Because a lot of us are just going through life mainly on autopilot, technology to think for that, right? And so our lives are so automated that we don't have to think many times. So it's being engaged with your spirit and your mind, and then bringing that to a point of, your body, so your execution. And so if we start that with ourselves and build those habits in our personal lives, we can then bring that into the business environment as well. And that is one thing that I have seen a lot of companies, struggle with, or a lot of entrepreneurs or business people struggle with, is that they get caught up in psyching themselves out instead of psyching themselves up, right? And so they get caught up with the things that they were taught or the things that they were told, and they cannot seem to let that go, right? And so it's just the plethora of options and possibilities that exist in our society that really ultimately restricts us when it really shouldn't. But if we can kind of get ourselves to a point where we can kind of let that go let go of, predispositions, things that maybe were pushed into our mind or, told to us that maybe aren't even necessarily true, or things that we hear on the media and so forth. And if we just kind of let that go and then focus on, you know, what is the right thing to do? What is going to bring us to goal, and then execute on that, and execute on that only. Forget about kind of everything else going on in the world, and just focus on your goal. Forget maybe even about yourself for a minute. Forget about your ego, or maybe any personal hangups, or types of things that maybe you've been dealing with all your life, whether it's a physical disability or that scar that you've been trying to get rid of that you feel is a blemish. If you can forget about all that and then just kind of focus on the goal, that is really key. But when we talk about goals, another thing that we need to think is why do I have this goal? Mm-hmm. What is it going to do for me? What is it going to do for me 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What is it going to do for others if I accomplish this goal? And that right there, it has to be intangible. It has to be long lasting. It has to have intrinsic value. They can't be necessarily material, because those types of goals, this is why they say, if you're an entrepreneur, don't just focus on making money, focus on the cause. Mm-hmm. Because those goals, if you're focusing on material goals or something like that, I can tell you're probably not going to reach your goal. So that's what I would tell business people. That's what I would tell organizations is to think at the simplest, think in the most simplistic terms of execution, mm-hmm. objectively executing, and then think about how you can deliver value intrinsically outside of yourself, like intrinsically. For the organization or for other people, with an intrinsic cause, not a material cause necessarily. And that's one of the things that a lot of organizations do struggle with, mm-hmm. is because they're so shareholder driven. They're so focused mm-hmm. on making a buck for the organization. They're so focused on the value of their shares that it drives, all of the energy, it drives all of the life out of the company, literally, because you're driving the life out of your employees, mm-hmm. when they feel that they're so expendable, that they're so expendable that they're only worth what they make for the company. And that's not how business should be run.
I agree with that. And I know that there is a huge debate in regards to social ethics when it comes to business versus your requirements, your duties to shareholders. And that's a pretty long debate, yes. But that's very particular with the conscious capitalism movement. But I want to break down a lot of what you just said, because that was a lot of profound insights. So the first, in regards to, you mentioned being reflective, but also taking action. And that's something that I've known and learned and studied myself, is that you can't just, you have to be reflective. You have to take time to self-analyze and understand, like you mentioned, not just go through the motions, which is easier said than done. And a lot of this might sound like mindset work, but you actually tie it more deeper to your spirit. You tie it more to like who you are, your values, your goals, and taking action. But once you reflect, you got to take action. You can't just reflect and do nothing about it, right? You got to take action towards those things once you figure it out. Because one of the things that I think is, that I say a lot, and it's true, is that success is boring. Business is legitimately boring. Like doing the right things, like you mentioned goals, like, okay, cutting weight, what do you have to do? Work out. How hard is that? It takes effort, but it's really boring, right? Same thing with business. What are you going to do? Talk to 20 people, 5 appointments, 1 new client, for example. That's boring. People are not boring. People are not simple. People are very complex, and you are a person hearing this. So being able to work through those complexities and understand, to cut out the noise, essentially, different noises from our notifications, from our the news media, from whatever other people are telling us that they think we should do, as opposed to what we see to be the right fit for our particular path, our particular journey to reach our particular goals, to help, like you mentioned, for a greater good. And I like that you tied that intrinsic value as opposed to just the material value, because once you reach the material, then you're not going to feel as fulfilled or empty. and you're gonna be like, what's next? And like you mentioned, it's a never ending, like trying to satiate something that's never going to be satisfied. So I really do appreciate
Exactly.
being able to break it down in that format, and how you're essentially, anyone who listens to this and applies it will be able to achieve a level of success through their business or personal goals, because it's all the same. Now, when you're able to translate it though to a business environment, you're dealing with other human beings who have different cultural backgrounds, different value systems. How have you seen leaders be able to communicate the goals, the values in such a way where everyone can have a buy-in, even though it is a diverse environment?
That's a great question. One way is to, if you ever look at leaders, right? True leaders, people who have done great things, and they have this kind of aura of mystery about them, and it's because their approach is very simple. It's almost kind of removed, so to speak, which kind of creates this a bit of mystery around them. And so what I mean by that is, and the terms and the way that you speak as a leader to your people, you need to have a consistency in the way that you speak, right? It has to come from an authentic place, because that will allow you to also speak consistently. How do you develop authenticity in yourself, and then speak consistently on behalf of that authenticity? Well, once again, it goes back to cause. It goes back to what your cause is, and if your cause is sincere. And if your cause is sincere, I guarantee you'll be authentic. You'll come off as authentic, because you'll be consistent, because you have no other choice but to be consistent when you're speaking to from a point of authenticity. And that's one thing that I see a lot of leaders struggle with is just the authenticity part. When you're authentic, you don't need to really say much. You just kind of are who you are, and there's a certain kind of command presence there, right? And so, what that allows is, it allows a voice in your organization. People talk about things like open door policy. I have an open door policy. My door is always open. As a matter of fact, I don't even have a door on the hinges. That's how open door my policy is that, like, I don't carry around an ego. I'm always willing to learn, because I feel that I can learn from my seniors, my peers, or my subordinates, which is one reason why I mentor, because I learned from those people that I mentor as well. And we all have a lot to offer, because we're all having different experiences, right? And we all look at things differently. And so it's that collectivism, it's that kind of collective group thought, that if you can go out and kind of build these relationships, and really take a true stance, a true motive at learning from people, you're not gonna have any problem leading people, that's for sure. And so if you can kind of remain objective, what that's going to allow is people to feel like you're approachable, and you get to hear the voice of your organization, the complaints, the struggles, the concerns, the fears, and then as the leader, what your job is to do, if you're running a company or a business, what your job is to do is to figure out how to essentially mitigate those concerns or address those challenges within an organization as much as possible, so that people can do their job, to empower people to do their job and enable people to do their job, right? And sometimes addressing those concerns, or dealing with those challenges and unforeseens in the organization, sometimes that involves it can involve a multitude of approaches, but sometimes that involves some sort of, it could be an organizational restructure, it could be disciplinary, it could be educational. There are a lot of different ways to do it. I will say that I remember when I was a young Marine, I was a young private back in 2000, it was like 2002.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing what we call a CAX in 29 Palms, California, and combined arms exercise. And I left my rifle. It wasn't loaded or anything. We were just doing training evolutions.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is like you never leave your rifle. You never leave gear like unaccounted for, especially rifles. Can you imagine if we were in Iraq and every Marine just left their rifle unattended? Can you imagine? Yeah. So it was lack of taking, like I did not take responsibility, right? And I didn't think it was a serious matter. I was a young Marine, and my sergeants took me out to the middle of the desert, and they made me dig a hole to China, and it sucked. It was hot, and I dug a hole that was probably 6 feet deep easily. Oh. And, and they made me take my rifle apart down to the very firing pin, which is about the size of a sewing needle, and they made me bury it. I was out there all day, but I'll tell you what, I never lost my rifle again. I never left it ever again. And, so that served me well, because a year later, I was in combat, and I was in the invasion of Iraq. And, I had, there were so many different situations that I was in where, I needed my rifle. I needed a weapon. And, if for some reason I ever got myself into a situation where I didn't have my weapon, well, I might not be here speaking to you today.
Wow.
So it's a very serious, and these, these things that we deal with in business, it's important for leaders to try to kind of express some point of seriousness about the things that go on in sort of organization, because ultimately it does affect people. We're not in war or combat. But if you're running an organization, you've got people that depend on you, particularly if you're, working in the finance industry or the healthcare industry. People's lives are dependent on you to do your job. Otherwise they can't maybe do the things that they need to do. And it could potentially be, it could potentially be life-threatening for them. Yeah. If they can't access a business application, if they can't access their bank account, it could potentially be life-threatening if they need to pay for some kind of medicine, or if they need to take their kids to the hospital or something like that. That could be a very serious situation. And if your company is not doing their job, serving their customers well, managing the systems, the software systems, that type of stuff, then people can't do what they need to do. And if you, maybe you're a large company and you've got thousands of customers or vendors or of some sort, or software partners, all those companies then get affected as well. Yeah. And that's just the basic kind of project management thing as well too, that I learned when I was a project manager. So hopefully that kind of answers your question there.
No, it does. And you hit a lot of very high points. And, to speak on that last point is seeing the importance of the work that you're actually doing, showing up in a way that will support your clients and your team, and not as a us versus them, but my role, my job, my consulting, my business, my firm, my customers depend on me to do this so they can do X, Y, and Z. And being able to communicate that to your team effectively completely shifts the conversation as like, oh, I have a job, I have to push these buttons, type in this keyboard, as opposed to I have a responsibility. And I think that's
exactly
an empowering, but also a very impactful shape of perspective. But Paul, I really did enjoy, you being able to break those high level insights and being able to apply that to everyday life. But for our listeners who want to thank you or connect with you after the episode, what's the best place for them to go?
So you can actually go to my website, reciprocityroi.com. You can reach me there. You can also reach me on my CV, my curriculum vitae site, BAM, B-A-M, that stands for Businessman, Athlete, Marine, businesses.com. So bambusinesses.com, you can reach me there, set out a slot on my calendar. I'm also all over social media on LinkedIn and various publications and whatnot. I'm not hard to find.
Wonderful, Paul. And we'll have those links in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being on, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.